Welcome to today's video. I want to do a deep dive in some of my approaches on how I build Power Apps, and you'll see from the very beginning to the very end of how you can build a fully functional app using SharePoint. And we're going to do it for a project management app. We're going to call it Tasky, and we're going to be using two SharePoint lists. One of them will be storing the project details, and the other one will be storing the task details. And they're all going to be related to each of the projects. And we're going to make it fully functional all in this video. So you're going to see from the very beginning to the very end. And we're going to do it in a way where it's very stylish and modern. So you'll see some navigation menus that are expandable. We're going to use custom SVG icons. We're going to create headers. We're going to create cool galleries. And it's going to be all fully responsive, all the way from like a desktop monitor to an app, either on the tablet or a phone, whatever it is. Landscape, portrait mode, it doesn't matter. It's going to all look great and it's going to look very modern, and you can follow along and hopefully learn some things along the way. I will say it's not going to be perfectly edited. I'll have to go back and forth a few times to change some things, but for the most part, hopefully it's easy enough to follow, or if you're not following, at least you're picking up some different tricks that you can implement into your own apps and make you a better Power Apper. So let's just dive in. So in my SharePoint site, I've created a tasks and a projects SharePoint list, and we'll go over the tasks first. So they each have ID. This is the default ID column in SharePoint. So that's totally fine. We have the title, which is just the default text column. We have a project ID, which I've created a column and is just a number column. Called it project ID. That's all that is. And we're going to plug in the different projects from our projects SharePoint list, but I'll show you how that all works throughout the length of this video. The description is just the multi-text column. It's just a multiple lines of text column called description. We have a start date, which is just the date and time. Same with the due date. Status, we have a choice column, and we have to do, in progress, ready for QA, and completed statuses. So you can definitely choose whatever you like, but those are the ones I've chosen to go with. We have a priority column, which is also a choice column. It has low, medium, and high choices. And assigned to is just going to be a personal or group column. We show profile photos, although it doesn't really matter in the SharePoint list. And under more options, you want to make sure you select allow multiple selections, or if you don't, you can definitely turn that off, but I've chosen to give multiple selections. And so that's our task list. I've pre-populated the data manually using ChatGPT for some data. So these are just some random tasks that I've inputted here. It's going to help us with the build of the app. When we start to put it into galleries, we'll be able to visualize what the data will look like. And throughout the build, we're going to eventually be able to create these lists and delete these SharePoint lists using only our Power App. And so the projects list, again, I've created a separate list, and this is where the project ID is coming in. It's automatically generated by SharePoint. This is just the ID. And we have our title column, description, start date, due date, status. In this one, I've done a choice column, and it's also just in progress and completed. And assigned to, again, is a person column, and it allows for multiple selections. And this is the ID number that we're going to plug into the tasks project ID. So this is just an empty number field, and I've manually inputted these for now. But again, when we build the app, we'll eventually be able to do it all within Power Apps, and we won't ever have to really come in here to change any data. All right, so let's go ahead and create our Canvas app. So we're gonna do app name. Let's call it, it's a project management app, so let's maybe call it Tasky. And we'll do a tablet. And so right now we just have one screen. We do want the app to be responsive. So what we have to do is go to the settings and go to the display, and we're gonna turn off scale to fit. And that's gonna disable the lock aspect ratio and everything else, so it'll be fully responsive. But we do have to use containers to make sure that we set the right properties and make it behave the way we want it to as the shrinks expand or they shrink down to the mobile size. So once we do that, we're gonna go into our app, and let's go up to the formulas bar and just set up some theming concepts for our app. So I would say let's first define the colors that we wanna use. It'll be easier to just reference them throughout the app, and then if we ever change our mind, we can just quickly just change them up and make it much easier to change those color values. So I'm gonna say my theme, and we're gonna set that equal to, and we're gonna set up a few records here. So we define the records within our curly braces, and it's gonna have different properties. So it's gonna have our primary color, and we can go to Google, I guess, and we can just search for a color picker. And we can just sort of play around. Maybe we can use this as our primary color. We'll go ahead and copy that hex code, go back into Power Apps, and let's go ahead and put that under the color value property. And we'll do that within the quotation. And I'm gonna do the same for all the other colors. We're just gonna do some light variations of gray, green, purple, blue, and orange. We'll see how we use them. We can always play around and come back and change these up, but for now, I think that's a good start. And we also wanna connect to our data sources. So what we can do is go to data, add data. We're gonna look up SharePoint, and we're gonna find our SharePoint site. In my case, it's this one. And here we can see the projects and the tasks that we created, those SharePoint lists. We're gonna just check both of those and connect. So now those are in. Another data source that I like to connect to is Office 365 users. This will allow us to get information about the current user and potentially other people within the organization. So I'm gonna connect to that, and we'll see how we use it down the road. And actually the first way we're gonna use this is to get the current user's details. So I'm just gonna store it in this formulas bar here, and let's call it current user. And this is going to equal Office 365 users dot user profile v2. And we're going to put in user dot email and a semicolon. So this is gonna pull all the properties for the current user of your app, and we'll also use that in different places in the app. I also want to set up some records for my icons because we're going to use some custom SVG icons within our app, especially around our navigation menu. And if you don't know how to get them or how to sort of implement them, please check out my other videos. I have done some navigation menus in the past. So I'm just going to say my icons, and that's also going to equal within a squiggly bracket to symbolize our records. I'll put our first icon as home, and this is the code for the house that we're going to use. I'm going to also add a comma and include another icon, and it's going to be home fill. So the home fill is going to be the colored version of this icon. So I'll show you what that looks like later, but we're going to play around and switch between the two based on if the particular navigation menu is selected. I'm also going to have a folder for the projects. So I'm going to do a very similar thing here. We'll have a folder icon and as well a filled version of that icon. And then we're also going to have a list icon, which is going to be for our tasks. So I'm just going to go here. I also want to get a hamburger icon. So I'm just going to set that in here as well. And then we're just going to close it off with our curly brace and a semicolon. And the last thing we want to set up on our formulas bar is a table to store the details of our navigation menu. So I'm going to call it menu items equals. And for this, I'm going to create a table. So you can either write table bracket, or you could just do a square bracket, and then within that, do a squiggly bracket to symbolize each record. And then each of those pieces is going to have an ID. And I'm going to start with 1. I'm also going to have a name. And for this one, I'm going to have it say home. I'm also going to have an icon. And as you remember, we created our icons here. So I'm going to actually reference my icons and then the name of the icon that we gave it. So it's going to be my icons.home. And I also want to have the filled version of my icon. So I'm going to say icon fill. And again, my icons.home fill. And then lastly, I also wanted to have it go to a screen. So right now I'm going to have it say app.activeScreen. So this will change once we get to creating our different screens. And we can close this record off, do a comma, and add a couple more items. I'm just going to copy and paste this. Let's say 2 more times because we're going to, I think, have 3 records. Close off the table, add a semicolon, and we'll just change these up here. So it's going to be ID 2, and the next one will be tasks, and the icon will be the list, and the filled version will be list fill, and we'll leave the screen as is. And then the third navigation menu item is going to be our projects, and the icon will be folder and folder fill. And that'll wrap up the beginning sort of setup of our app within the formulas bar. So the next thing we can do is create our navigation menu. And I'm thinking we'll do a left navigation menu that's expandable. So depending on what the users need, they can have it collapsed or expanded. We'll utilize some of the icons that we have and do all of that. So we can create it within the components section. And we're gonna do create new component. And let's call this the left nav. We definitely want to turn on app scope, access app scope, so that you can sort of pass along variables from the app to the component and vice versa. The width, let's for now just set it to 200, but we will come back to the width and make it variable. For the height property, I'm going to make it app.height. And so now we're going to utilize some containers. So let's go and insert a vertical container. And we're gonna set its X to 0, and sometimes it shows 0 here, but it's 40 here. Not sure why, but make sure you set it to 0 up here. The Y property, also we want it to be 0. And we're going to set the width to parent.width and height to parent.height. And we're gonna remove the border radius, so make that 0, and remove the drop shadow. And so within this container, let's go ahead and insert another container, but this time a horizontal one. And this is going to be sort of our title and our hamburger icon. So what we want to do is turn off flexible height, and maybe let's set it to 60. So it's going to be fixed at that height. We're going to set the minimum width to 0, remove the border radius, and remove the drop shadow. And here we're going to actually go ahead and insert our image, which we're going to use to store the icon. We're going to set the height to stretch, and we're going to set the minimum height to 0. Width we can do maybe to like a 70. Another thing to add actually about the colors, we have them in a color value because that's what some of the properties require. But we're going to actually want to store the text value of this hex color, because we're going to replace it in some of these places here where it says current color. We're going to want to be able to replace it with a text, and we can't do that. We can't reference the primary color when it's stored inside a color value. So what we can do is just copy each of these, and let's continue on here, and we're just going to say primary text and gray text. And this is going to be the text version of the color. And we're just going to delete the color value in the bracket. And so now when we go back into our component within the image, we can go ahead and place in this code, which is going to add our hamburger icon. So in order to add the SVG code, you need to put this in here and encode URL. And this is our icons here, and this is the hamburger that we're referencing. And we're using the substitute function to replace that current color with the color from my theme, gray text. And so you see the result here in our menu. Now this is a little too big, so what we're gonna do is add some padding left and right. So I'm just gonna do a 25 on each side. That might be too small actually, so maybe let's do 20. That looks pretty good. And within this container, we also want to add in the title of our app. So I'm going to add just the text label, and we're going to say Tasky. That'll be the name of our app. We're gonna have Lato Black as our font, and font size, maybe we can do it as a 16. We're gonna keep everything the same, except we're gonna do a stretch in the container, and minimum height we're gonna set to 0. And the flexible width will be on, and again, minimum width will also be 0. For the font color, I do wanna change that to that of my theme dot primary. And there you go. So that's our nice purple color. Now we want to make this image functional, right? Because it's not a button, it doesn't have an onSelect property. So what we need to do is actually put it in a container and put a button, an invisible button over top of it. So what we can do is click on this container, insert a container. This time it'll just be the regular one. And we're going to take this image, Command X or Control X, and paste it into the container. Its X property will be 0. And this container, actually, the minimum height will be 0. And the stretch flexible width will be off. It will be 70. And this image here, we're going to change the width to parent.width and parent.height. So now it's just going to follow whatever that container is. And within this container now, we can insert a button. I want to use an invisible button. So what we can do is just insert, like a regular button. We'll move it so that its X and Y properties are 0. The width will be parent.width and height will be parent.height. We're going to delete the text and we're going to make it invisible. So what we have to do actually is go to advanced. I like to just go to the fill property, and the fill, we're just going to make that transparent. And the hover fill, let's make the hover fill transparent as well. And pressed fill will be transparent. And then border radius, I'll make that 0. Border, I'm going to also set it to none. And one thing for this container, we do want to make sure we turn off the drop shadow and turn the border radius to 0. And there you go. So now we have an invisible button over top of our hamburger icon, and it's all within this container. So this button now, I want to set up its onSelect properties, and this will actually toggle our menu to go from 70 pixels to 200 pixels. So we're going to do set var menu open to not var menu open. So this is sort of going to loop through the value true or false, and just set it to whatever it's not. So now that we've done that, what we can do to make it functional is go back to our left nav, so the main menu here, and on the width property, we can set its width to if var menu open is true. So you don't have to actually say is equals true. By default, if it's var menu open, then it's going to be 200, else 70, and close the bracket. So you can see here, if we hold the option key and we can click through, and we can see it's doing the open close every time we click. And there you go. So that's our top section of our menu. Now we can go ahead and build out the 3 items that we built through the forms. So we're going to select container 1. This is our root container, and I'm going to insert a gallery, and it's going to be a blank vertical gallery. And the items property is going to be menu items. And we've already defined this table. You can see here it has our icons, it has our icon fills, the name, so home, tasks, projects, and the screen. Right now it's set to app.activeScreen, but we're going to change those after. And so what we have to do first is update the template size. I'm going to set it equal to 40. So this is going to make them not be so tall. And we're going to turn off flexible height, and I'm going to set the height to this formula here. It's going to be self.allitemsCount. So all the items, which is currently 3, times self.templateHeight, which we set to 40. And we're going to wrap it within this if error statement. And that does sometimes trigger a notification because it hasn't loaded yet. So this will take care of that. I'm going to remove the template padding. So we're going to make it 0. Wrap count will stay at 1. The minimum width I'm going to set to 0. Show scroll bar I'm going to turn off. Border I'm going to just set to none. And one other thing, I'm going to go to delay item loading and turn that to false. So that's going to remove some of the load when we put it in onto the screen. And so now we're ready to edit inside of the gallery. So I'm just going to hit this pencil button to edit the gallery. So each item, and I'm going to insert a container. And it's going to be this manual container here. And we're going to, again, go to the X property, make sure it says 0 up here. We're also going to do the Y property, make sure that's 0. Width is going to be parent.template width. And height is going to be parent.template height. We're going to turn off the drop shadow and delete the border radius. I'll remove the border as well. Border radius actually I'll set to 5. Width, I'm going to do parent.template width minus 20. And height, I'm going to do parent.template height minus 6. The X property we're actually going to set to parent.template width minus self.width divided by 2, and that's going to center it. And we're going to do a similar approach to the Y property, and we're going to do parent.template height minus self.height divided by 2. So you can see it's going to center it within that template. And so now within this container, we're going to insert another container. And this is going to be the horizontal one. And this is going to be housing our icons and our text labels. So position wise, we're going to change the X to 0, change the Y to 0. We're going to remove the border. Border radius will be 0. Drop shadow will be none. The width is going to be parent.width. And height will be parent.height. The justify will be at the start, and the line vertical will be at the center. And then next we can start to put in our image, which is going to be our icons. So again, we're going to use an image. We're going to set its height to stretch with a minimum height of 0. The width is going to be 50. And the code for our image is going to be, again, that for the SVGs, we're going to add this text here. We're going to encode URL, and we're going to do a conditional statement here. So if the app's active screen equals this item dot screen, then we're going to have the icon fill. Otherwise, we're going to have our regular icon, and we're going to substitute the current color of that icon with a color that's going to depend on whether the app's active screen is this item screen. Then we're going to use the primary text from our theme. Otherwise, we're going to use the gray text from our theme. So right now, because all of our screens are navigating to the app.active screen, they're all going to be that dark or primary color. But once we update some of our screen names, it will adjust. So only one of them will be filled in, the other ones will be outlined. So for now, that's working well. And I'm actually going to set the height in the center here. We're going to align in the center, and we're going to limit the height to 25. And we're going to keep the width at 50, and everything else should be good to go. We could add some padding from the top and bottom, but I think that's good for now. And so next for the text label, we're going to do container 5. We're just going to select that, and we're going to insert a text label. We're going to set the text property to this item.name. So let's make it Lato, and then font weight is going to be bold with the font size 10. We're going to turn on flexible width, and we're going to turn minimum width to 0. Height will be stretch with a minimum height of 0. And one thing we're going to do is set the visible property, and we're going to make it dependent on var menu open being true. So when we close it, it's going to hide it and we're only going to see the icons. And then for the color, we're going to go to the font color and we're going to paste in this formula here. So if the app.activeScreen equals this item screen, then we're going to use our primary theme. Otherwise, we're going to use the gray color. And again, same thing with the icons. All of our menu items are leading to the apps.activeScreen, so they're all going to be purple, but when we make the change later, the others will be grayed out and only one of them will be purple. And so now the reason we put this all under this container 4, we want to add an invisible button over top so we can make this functional. So what we're going to do again, we're going to insert a button. It's going to sort of live over top of everything. We're going to move it over here or manually set the X property, the Y property to 0. I'm going to delete the border. Border radius will be 0. We're going to delete the text. We're going to set the width to parent.width, height to parent.height. And we're going to update some of its fill properties. So we're going to do fill. Fill will be transparent. The hover fill, we're actually going to do RGBA 190, 190, 240, 0.1. And that's going to make it a very light transparent purple. And then the pressed fill will be a color fade of self.hoverfill minus 30%. Make sure you spell it correctly. And there you go. So when you hover and then when you press, it'll become a little bit darker. And of course we want it to be functional. So we're going to select its onSelect property and we're going to do navigate to this item dot screen and we're going to do it in a fade transition. So right now that looks pretty good to me. And one other thing that we can do, totally optional, I think I would like to do it. If we go to the left nav and we insert a rectangle, I just want to do like a small line to separate the edge of the component here. So I'm going to give it a 1 width, and the position for X I'm going to do parent.width minus self.width. And that's going to place it right at the edge here. For the height, we're going to do parent.height, and that's it. So it's going to go all the way down. And then the color, I'm just going to do my theme.light gray. So it's not very visible here, but when we place it onto our screens, it should be pretty visible here to see some separation with that gray color. And then that's pretty good. I think we can go ahead and insert it and see how it looks. I guess at least set up our screens. But right now, so screen 1, let's just call it home. And we can insert some containers. I'm going to do a horizontal container first. And we're going to do x0, y0. Width is going to be parent.width. Height is going to be parent.height. And it's going to take up the full width there. So now here we can go ahead and insert our new custom container. So we're going to expand custom and our left nav. And there we go. One thing that we also want to make an adjustment to is the height. Right now it's for app height, but I'm going to make it parent.height. So this is just going to stay referenced within the container here. And you can see, you can see the line slightly. I might actually just go back and let's update that rectangle here. Maybe let's make it just the gray color. Make it a little bit darker. That's actually too dark. Maybe let's go ahead and do a custom one here. Let's do RGBA. Let's do 220, 220, 220, and 1. There you go. I like that better. All right, so we have our navigation menu. The next thing I want to do is build up a top header here. So I think we'll just go ahead and build out a new component. So we can go create a new component and we can rename it top header and make sure to turn on access app scope. The width will be app.width. The height, I'm going to change it to 60. And the width actually, let's make it a max of app.width or 300. So when the app shrinks down, this header will not shrink more than 300 pixels. And I'm actually going to copy this rectangle that we had as a separator here, and I'm going to paste it into this one here. And I'm just going to change up its X property to be 0. The width is going to be parent.width, and the height is going to be 1. And the Y property actually will be parent.height minus self.height. And that's going to put it right at the bottom. Again, hard to see right now, but it will be visible later on. And so we're going to do insert a new container, and it's going to be a horizontal container. We'll make sure its X property is 0. We're going to make sure the Y property is also 0. Width is going to be parent.width. Height will be parent.height. We're going to vertical align everything in the center. Border radius will be 0 with no drop shadow. I am going to do some padding. So we're going to do 20 on the left and 20 on the right. So that's going to give us some space on both sides. And I'm going to make the justify horizontal to space between. So this is going to put our new button here and then put our user information on the very right hand side. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to insert a button. And the text, I'm just going to do plus create. Width, let's make it 100. The font, let's go with Lato. Font size will be 10. The fill color, we're going to go with mytheme.primary. I'm going to search up all the fill properties and we're going to change it. So we already updated the fill. The hover fill, we're going to actually do a color fade of self.fill minus 10%. And then the pressed fill will be self.fill minus 20%. And then we're going to update the color properties. So the border color, I'm actually going to turn off the border. So we're going to set that to none. Maybe border radius we can set to 5. And we do want to actually change the color property for the hover color. I'm going to change this to self.color. And then the pressed color will be self.color. So we're just going to keep it to whatever it is. In this case, it's white. So there, I'm happy with that button. Next thing we can do is insert within this container. We can insert another container, and it's going to be a horizontal one. And this is going to store the image and name of the current user of our app. So what we can do is change it to right align on the horizontal. Vertical align, we can keep it at the center. Minimum height will be 0. And then minimum width can be 0 as well. We're going to turn off border radius and turn off the drop shadow. And so first we can insert a label. We're going to do a text label, and we're going to use the font of Lato. We're again going to use font size 10. The text will be current user. That's where we stored the information of our current user. And I'm just going to use given name. So that's going to be the first name. There it is. I'm going to make it right align. I'm going to make it semi-bold. And that should be good for that. And we're going to also insert an image. And this image is going to be user.image. And we're going to set the height to 30 and the width to 30. We're going to set the border radius to 15, which is half of our height and width, which is going to make it into a perfect circle. I'm going to increase the border thickness to 1, and I'm going to change the border color to my theme.gray. And I think that looks pretty good. And so we'll make sure to update the onSelect property of this create button. For now, it's just false. But once we get deeper into setting up our app, we're going to update the onSelect property here as well. But for now, we'll just keep it as is. So let's go ahead and insert this into our app. And so we have a horizontal container, but what we want to do next to this left navigation is do a vertical container, because we want things to now stack going downwards. Otherwise, if we keep adding stuff, it's going to stack horizontally. So we need to change that and go ahead into insert. And it's going to be a container of the vertical variety. And there you go. You can see it's now taking up the space that's not taken up by our navigation menu. And we're going to make sure that it is of type stretch. So minimum height will be 0. And the minimum width will be 0 as well. But they will all be flexible. So we're also going to remove the border radius and the drop shadow. And so within here, now we can insert our custom top header. And there you go. But one thing you'll notice that it's going way off the screen, it's too wide. And that's because we're using the width of app width. So what we need to do is just change this to, instead of app width, this will be parent.width. And there you go. That's going to bring it within the container, and that should all be good. And the great thing here, if we hold the Alt key or the Option key and we click this, you'll see it's all fully dynamic. And if we click the play button, you'll see it stretches out all the way to my screen. If we go into the mobile version, let's say iPhone Pro Max, there you go. You can see it's all fully dynamic and flexible. And if we go to orientation, it's all looking good. And so I think that's pretty good. And this will actually serve as the base template for all 3 of our screens, because we've already inputted the navigation menu, the top header. It's just a matter of updating some of the content inside here, but we can do that independently of each other. So what we can do now actually is go duplicate screen and duplicate screen again. And we can rename this tasks. Oh, and actually we can't rename it to that because our data source is already called tasks. We also can't use project. So what we actually can do is just call it my tasks. And this screen, we can say my projects. And so having done that now, we can go to our app here. And in our formulas bar, we can actually go ahead and reference those screens in the appropriate way. So our home screen, we can just reference our home screen. The tasks will be my tasks. And for projects will be my projects. And there you go. So now all our screens are referenced within our menu items. And if we look at our navigation menu, we can see that the icons here are no longer filled and they're gray. So, and if we click on the tasks, it's going to navigate us through the various screens that we have. And it works both expanded and collapsed. And what I want to start out to do first is build out the tasks screen. And this is where we're going to have a gallery with all of our items for our tasks, along with a breakdown of what category that they're in or what their status is. And so let's go ahead and do that. First, I want to add a bit of a header here just below this create button. So let's go ahead and insert a text label, and let's just call this tasks. And we're going to make this Lato black. Maybe let's make it size 14. Give a bit of a left padding of 20. And the width will be stretch with no minimum width. And flexible height, no. So we're gonna keep flexible height off, and 40 I think is totally fine for the height. And so beneath that, we're going to insert our gallery, and it's going to be a blank horizontal gallery. So we're starting with a horizontal gallery, and then we're gonna insert a vertical gallery within that. And that's where our tasks are gonna stack on top of each other. But first, we're gonna set our items to choices of our tasks dot status. So it's going to create a horizontal gallery of all of the choices that we have in our status column within SharePoint, which, if you recall, is to do, in progress, ready for QA, and completed. So this is our template here, but let's go ahead and update some of the gallery properties. The width I'm actually going to set to 0. Height will be flexible, and I'm going to say 0 for the minimum height. The background fill of the gallery, I'm just going to go to my theme.light gray. And the template size, I'm just going to make it to 290. I'll also remove the template padding. And I'm also going to change the delay item loading to false. And now we can go ahead and, within each template, enter the edit mode. And we're going to insert a text label. And I can sort of drag and drop this wherever we like. I'm going to set its X property. Let's do X at 30. And Y, let's do it at 15. Width, I'm going to do parent.template width minus self.x. So that's going to go from where it begins to the end of the template gallery here. And maybe actually let's set it to 50. Let's set the X to 50. And then we're going to change it to Lato black. Let's make it size 14. And everything else looks good to me. Now again, within this template, let's go ahead and insert a button. And I'm just going to drag it over here and make it a bit narrower. And I'm going to use this as a bit of a color indication of what each status is going to represent. And I'm going to delete the text. Let's set the X to 15. Y to 15 as well is good. Width, let's make it 20. And we want to change the fill property. And we're going to use this switch function. So if this item.value is equal to do, then we're going to use the light blue. In progress will be light purple, light orange, light green for completed. And if it's none of those, it'll be transparent. So that's going to look something like this. We're also going to remove the border. I'm going to say none. And you can see kind of the hover is doing that. So I'm actually going to display mode as disabled, or I'm going to change it to display mode as view, so that if they hover over top of it, it's not going to actually change anything. So now that we have our gallery for each sort of status, I want to set up a gallery to show to display each task associated with each status. So what we're going to do is insert a gallery, and it's going to be a blank vertical gallery. And I'm going to just drag it down, or actually I could just manually set it here. The Y property, let's maybe set it to 80. That seems pretty reasonable. I'm going to change the template size to maybe, let's say 160. I'm going to have template padding, and I'm going to increase that to 15. Show scroll bar, I'm going to disable that for now. Width, I'm going to have it set as parent.template width. And the height property, I'm going to say parent.height minus self.y. So that's going to bring it all the way to the bottom, subtracting where it's starting from. And for this, I'm also going to change the delay item loading to false. And then we're going to hit the little edit button here. And within here, we're going to start inserting some of the details for each of our tasks. And I'm going to insert a container, and it's going to be a vertical container. Make sure that your X and Y properties are 0. Width, I'm gonna say parent.width. Actually, no, parent.template width. And height will be parent.template height. I'm gonna have some padding, so at the top and bottom, I'm gonna put it as 10. And on the left and right, I'm gonna do 20. Border will be none. Border radius, I'm gonna set to 10. And I'm gonna keep it at a regular drop shadow. And of course, I don't actually have any data here, so I think we forgot to add a data source. So our data source for this gallery is actually going to be a filter on our tasks list. And we're going to do status.value equals to this item.value. And there we go. So this is where we're matching up based on the top gallery, the parent gallery's status value. So to do will match up to all of the tasks that have the status to do, and so on. So now let's go back to our container. That's looking pretty good. And we can start to insert some of our pieces here. So I'm gonna insert a button just to show our priority, whether it's low, high, or medium. And I'm going to use the classic button, and this is going to be text, and I'm going to say this item dot priority dot value. There we go. So you can see it puts it in there, but of course we want to make this a little bit nicer to look at. So the width, I'm going to actually set it manually here to 60. The height, I'm going to set it to 18. We're going to change the font. So it's going to be font size 8. I think that's as small as it goes. We're also going to change it to Lato. We're going to make the fill transparent. The color of the font, we're going to change to this formula here. And it's a switch function based on the priority. And if it's low, it's going to be light blue, medium will be light orange, high will be light purple. Otherwise, it'll be transparent. And then the border, we're going to change to self.color. So it's going to just match whatever the color is of the font. And actually, this container, I want it to be the background to be white. So I'm just going to go ahead and select the white. And you can see it's kind of not fully centered. So what I'm going to do is add a padding on the bottom. Or actually, I'll remove all the padding. And at the bottom, I'll set it equal to maybe a 2 or maybe a 1. Yeah, 1. And then it becomes a little bit more centered. And the border radius, I think I'll just change it to a 5. So there you go. And so next up, we're gonna let's insert a new text label. We're gonna set it to this item dot title. So that's gonna be the title of each of our tasks. I'm gonna set it equal to Lato black. We're gonna do font size 12. I'm gonna make the height 30. Width will be stretch, and I'm going to turn off wrap, and minimum width will be 0. So that's pretty good. And then next up, we're going to do another text label, and this time it's going to be this item description, and it's going to be Lato. We're going to do size 8. With the vertical line, we'll keep it at the top. Width, we're going to set to stretch. Minimum width, we're going to set to 0. And the height, maybe let's set it to 50. There, so we can get at least three lines. And the font color, we're going to set to my theme dot light gray. Let's see. Oh, that's too light. So let's do gray. There you go. And then one more thing we're going to add is another text label. And we're going to use this to show the start and end dates. And so we're going to have, this is the text. So it's going to be this item dot start date. And we're wrapping it inside the text function and mapping it so it shows the month and the day, dash, and then this item dot due date, again, month and the date. So this is what it looks like. We just need to change some of its properties. So the font, we're going to change it to Lato. We're going to go to 8 and we're going to do semi-bold. And maybe we set it to align onto the very right. And then we're also going to set the font to align to the right as well. And actually, I think we can better space these out. So this is our description. We have it set as a height 50, but what happens if we just evenly distribute, make this a flexible height with a 0 minimum height, and we make this a flexible height as well with 0 minimum height. So that's gonna push it down a little bit. And so that's looking pretty good to me. What we can do now is layer a button, an invisible button over top of it. And we can actually go back to our components and steal that invisible button that we used on our left navigation menu. And that was this one right here. It was just over each of the items. So I'm gonna copy that one and we're gonna go into our gallery here, click that edit button, and over top of everything, we're gonna paste this button. And of course, it's on select property. Let's just set it to false for now. But you can see when we hover over it, it will do a bit of a shadow over top, which is nice. And so that's looking pretty good to me. And you can see it does work on a mobile. So it is responsive. You can slide through, scroll up and down, left and right. If you expand this, you can still see some of these tasks. So yeah, it's looking good. So now that we have the task gallery, we can do something very similar with the projects. I'm going to copy both of these and we're going to go to our other screen, which is going to be my projects. Within this container, under our top header, we're going to do paste. And it's going to paste everything in, except we're going to change, of course, a few things. Instead of tasks, it's going to say projects. This right here, instead of the main gallery, instead of task statuses, we're going to do projects.status. And this gallery, we're going to actually filter projects where status equals this item dot value. So these are the projects that I have currently entered. And we're gonna make some adjustments, of course. It's not all the same. Let's see. The task, we don't have priorities, so we actually can probably just delete this button altogether. We can keep the title. So the title is gonna be this item.title. The label, this is gonna be the description, so that's fine. And then the date, the start date and due dates are all the same, so we can keep that as well. Now you can see it kind of cuts off here, this description. So maybe we can make this a little bit shorter, maybe like a 45. Yeah, 45, and you can see it looks a little bit better without seeing half of the next lines. And you can see we have some space to play around with here. So I'm gonna actually show how many tasks are associated within each project in a sort of like a slider. So you can see the progress at a quick glance. We can do this using the slider input. And we can set the default to count if tasks project ID equals this item.id and status.value equals completed. And then the maximum is going to be a count if on the tasks where the project ID equals this item.id. And you can see that, this project has, I guess, 2 completed, and all the rest of them don't have any. So we can style this a little bit better as well. what we can do is turn the show value off. The handle size we can decrease to like a 7 so that it's much smaller. Display mode edit is fine. The width will be stretch and with a minimum width of 0. Height, I'm going to change it and decrease it to 10. The rail, I'm going to make it a little bit thicker to maybe 5. The color, I'm going to set it to my theme.gray or maybe light gray. The value fill, I'm going to set it to primary. And that looks pretty good to me. Another thing I'm going to do is just set a little text label to show how many tasks are completed. So it's going to give some additional context. And the text value here, I'm going to say slider1.value, and I'm going to give a slash slider1.max tasks complete. So here it is, but I will change some of its properties here on the font. So it's going to be Lato. I'm going to make it as small as possible. So I'm going to do the 8. We'll make this into semi-bold. I'm going to change its width property to stretch, and it's going to be minimum width of 0. The height, I'm going to change it to a little bit smaller. I'm going to set it to 30, and I'm going to change its color property to gray. So from my theme dot, do we want primary? Maybe let's keep it at the primary. That's fine. I'm just going to make the slider a little bit shorter, so maybe like an 8. And yeah, the label, I'm also going to change the vertical align to top just to get it as close as possible up there. I think that looks pretty good. And there you go. So we have our tasks, we have our projects. We haven't built out the home page yet, but I think the tasks and the projects looks pretty good so far. And now in order to actually make all of this functional, right? So this is all good, it looks good, but we need to also make it functional. So I'm gonna create a new screen, and it's going to be a blank screen. And let's call this task form. So this is what we're gonna use to view and edit our tasks. And we're gonna set this up first, and then once we're done that, we're gonna sort of do the same for projects, but this is good for now. We'll also set up this form. We'll do a container, and we're going to do a vertical container. We're going to make sure its X and Y properties are 0. The width will be parent.width, and the height will be parent.height. I'm going to make sure it's vertical justify to the start, and align horizontal will be in the center. Border radius, I'm going to say 0. Drop shadow will be none. And within here, we can go ahead and insert an edit form. And it's going to be form 1. And I'm going to set its data source to tasks. So that's our task data source. I'm also going to edit fields, and I'm going to add some of the pieces that we want, which is we definitely want assigned to, we want attachments, we want the description, the due date, priority, we want the start date, we want the project ID, we want the status and the title. So that's all good. We're going to go ahead and add those. And I'm also going to change the description to edit multi-line text. And we can close that off. And of course, this isn't very pretty. And I'm going to change the width to be in the center. And the width, I do want to make it, in order to make it dynamic, I'm going to set it to the minimum of 800 or the parent.width. So as soon as the app gets less than 800 pixels, it's going to start to shrink to whatever it is. But when it's really big or really wide, I don't want it to go like super stretchy. So we'll keep it here in the center. And one thing I will do, I'm just going to go edit fields and just rearrange some of these. I'm just going to minimize them so it's easier. We're going to put title up at the top. We're going to put attachments way at the bottom. Description will be right after the title. I want the project, maybe just under title actually, the project ID. We have the start date, the due date, status, priority, and attachments. I think that's pretty good. And the height, we'll keep it as flexible with no minimum height. I'm also going to change the border to none. Number of columns, I'm going to set it to 2, and I'm going to keep snap to columns on, but I will make some adjustments. So the title, I'm actually going to stretch it out to be all the way to the front, to the right. Project, I'm going to keep it all into one row as well. Description will be all one row. Assign to, I'm actually going to move sort of near the bottom here. Start date, due date, I'm going to keep together. Status and priority will be together. Assigned to, I'm going to move it to the very end here. And attachments, I will also have it occupy a whole field. And we don't need this to be too long, so maybe just down here like this. So there you go. We have, oh, maybe this needs to be a little smaller. Okay. So I kind of like that. That seems to be like a good format to aim for. I will actually add a heading. So we're gonna do a text label, and I'll move it up. So I'm gonna reorder, move to the top, and we're gonna say this is going to be task. It's gonna be Lato black, and maybe we can do like an 18. And we're gonna keep it centered, and we're going to set the width to stretch with no minimum width, and the height at 40. That seems to be fine. So if we preview this app, it's not going to have anything because we don't have any items currently stored inside of it. What we want to do to make this functional is we're going to go to our tasks gallery, and on the button that we have sort of hovering over top that gives us that hover effect, we're going to update its onSelect property. So we're going to set this current task into a variable. So I'm going to call this var task, and I'm going to call it this item. And we're also going to navigate to our screen. So task form, and I'm going to do a fade transition. You can do whatever you like though. It doesn't have to be that. But yeah, you just want to make sure you navigate to the task form. And if you can preview the app or hold the Option or Alt key, you can click on it and it'll take you to this next page. Nothing's on the form yet because we haven't told the form what data source it needs to reference. So we're going to select our form and go to Advanced. And under the item property, we're going to store our variable. So var task. You can see here, this is our form and all the data populated that was already part of this task, which is great. And we can see now when we preview the app, you can see once it gets to a certain point. So here, this is 800 pixels, but as soon as it starts to get under, it's going to now snap and go take the full width of the screen. And as it gets smaller, it will continue to follow. But you'll notice that size of the data cards doesn't follow. So we actually have to change each of those individually. So we're going to select each data card and we're going to update the width. So we're going to do width of parent.width. We're going to change this one to parent.width. So anything that's taking the full width of the form, we just want it to equal parent.width. The ones that take up, half of the form, we actually just wanted to say parent.width divided by 2. And again, for this one, parent.width divided by 2. And for status and priority, So depending on how much space these are going to take, you might want, when the form gets really small and narrow, you might want this to occupy a full length of the screen. But when it's, a bit wider, maybe you just want it in 2 rows. In those scenarios, what you'll need to do is set it to this formula here. So we'll update its width property to, if the parent.width divided by 2 is less than a certain number, I'm going to say 400, then I want it to be the parent width. Otherwise, will be the parent.width divided by 2. And I'm going to do the same for priority. So we're going to change that here. And then assign 2, I'll keep that always as parent.width. And attachments as well. Whoa. Okay, so now when we click play, and this might actually be a good example if I use my canvas size, or actually window size. And if I make this smaller, you'll see it starts to snap, and then at some point, the priority and the status, they start to go one under each other. The start date and the due date remain side by side. And here it is on a phone screen. In addition to this, we want to add a section for the buttons, so save and cancel buttons. So what we're going to do is inside of our container, we're going to insert another container, and it's going to be horizontal. And this one, I'm going to make it equal to a non-flexible height, and it's going to be, let's say 50. And the minimum width will be 0. We're going to have it justify in the center, align vertical in the center as well, and a gap of, let's say 30. And within each of these here, the border radius, I'm going to set to 0, drop shadow none. And within each of these, we're going to set some buttons here. And I kind of like the button that I created here into the top header. So I'm actually just going to copy this and go back into my form, into this container, and just paste it in. I'm going to paste it in twice. So this one, I'm actually going to change to cancel. So this is going to be a cancel button, and this one will be the save button. But one thing here that we'll do, we're going to actually enable the border here, and we're going to take the fill and just make it transparent. The color will be my theme.gray, and the border color will also be my theme.gray. And I'm actually going to increase this. I'm going to decrease the height of these to maybe, let's do a 30 or 35. Oops. Let's say 35. And I'm going to increase the container height to, let's say 60. So just to give it some more space. Yeah, no, let's keep the height at 40, and maybe let's just increase this even more. Let's do 70. Yeah, that looks better. And let's make this 70 as well to match. And there you go. So now we can see what it looks like. Okay, and we can see actually by default, based on the theme of the app, it's all in this blue drop-down colors. I can actually just change this to be a little bit more neutral. If we go to themes here, I'm gonna make it into this gray office color. It's a bit more neutral. It'll update all the default sort of selections into a gray. So that looks better. And I just noticed this button here, when it's selected, I need to update the focused border thickness. I'll keep it at 2. Focused border color will be self.border color. And then hover, the hover border color will be self.border color. And we'll do a color fade on that. Minus 20%. And the hover color will be self.color, but we're also going to do a color fade of minus 20%. That looks pretty good. And on cancel here, I want to update its on select property. We're going to go, we're going to reset form 1, and we're going to just go back. We're going to set var task to blank. And there we go. And on the save button on select, we're going to submit form 1. And on the forms on success property, we're going to set var task to blank and navigate, and then also go back. And we're going to notify task saved. And we're going to do notification type success. Okay, and there you go. So this is looking good so far. And some minor things that we can do to update the, the look and feel of these. I'm not going to go too crazy, but basically what you can do is just unlock these properties. You do have to click through each one, unfortunately. And what we can do is just update some of their properties. So I'm going to do the font weight semi-bold. Font size will be 12. And the titles here, I'm going to just change their color to mytheme.gray. So yeah, let's change the title colors here for all of them. And then I'm gonna also, just make all of these semi-bold, the actual values inside. And again, I'm gonna make it 12, because one thing, when you get into an app, it doesn't really matter on desktop, but when you start typing into an app, I think especially on the iPhone, particularly on the iPhones, it will zoom into the app, and it's hard to zoom back out. So it's good to set the input to size 12. All right. So that looks pretty good. Another minor change that you can do is just around the border colors. So if we do border color, so this has some error handling logic, but if we change from the parent border color and just make it my theme dot gray, it's just the lighter, my theme dot light gray. I find that that looks a little bit better. And I also want to change the focus border color to my theme dot primary. And the hover border color will be my theme dot primary. And the focus thickness, I will change it to maybe like a 3. There you go. And we would want to do that same thing for all of them. Now for the drop downs, we're going to do my theme dot primary. The pressed border color, again, my theme dot primary. And there you go. That's looking a little bit better, I would say. And for the project ID, I want to actually display a combo box here. So instead of this number is going to live in the background. It's going to be the ID of the SharePoint list of the project. But I want users to be able to select a project, change even the project, search, and it'll automatically update that number in the backend. So in order to do this, we have to first just note the data card value 7. That's the name of the existing default sort of number input here. We're going to delete this. So it's data card value 7. And we're going to, you can insert a regular combo box because we already made some adjustments to these here, just as far as the color and things. I'm just going to select that, go back to I'm just going to copy that and go back into our project ID, and I'm going to paste it in there. And I'm going to go to the display here, the X, I'm going to change to 30. And I'm going to actually change this data card value 7. That was the name of the old field. And that's going to take care of some of the errors here because it's going to be positioning based on the error. If there is an error, like if it's a required field, it will make sure to be there. But let's see what the errors are here. So the default selected items. Well, first, before we fix the errors, let's update the choices, so the items property. So instead of task.status, I actually want projects. I want the whole list of the projects, and that's some records, who it's assigned to, the ID, and the description, and then the title, and basically everything about it. We could even just limit it to show columns, just so we don't have, bring in too much data in there. I just want the projects, and I just want the title column, and I also want the ID column. There you go. So we have the ID and the title. I want the default selected items. Instead of parent.default, we're going to have to do something different here. So we're going to change the default selected items to this. We're going to do a lookup against the projects table where the ID equals this item, which is the tasks project ID. And you can see it auto-populated that particular project. And the other piece here that we have to update is the update property of the data card. So once a user selects one of these, they could change it. That means it's going to have a different ID. And we need to push that value back into the update property of the task. And we need to say, instead of data card value 7.text, because it's now a combo box, it's going to be selected.id. So I want to put that value of that number. So if right now it's 4, but let's say we change this to sales funnel, and you can see now it's actually ID 2, and that's going to push it back into the project. And the other piece I want to change is the text here. I don't want it to be the project ID. I just want it to say project. And there you go. So now you can actually see the project and change it if necessary. So now that we have the task form, what we can do is duplicate this. We're going to basically do some similar things, but it's going to be for projects. So project form. And of course, we're going to update this here. Instead of text, it's the task, it's going to be project. And I will update some of these things. We're going to change. Actually, before we do that, we might as well go copy sort of our logic here and go back to the projects. And on the buttons on select property, we're going to change it to this, except instead of storing this in var task, we're going to store it in var project. And it's going to be this item. And instead of navigating to the task form, we're going to go to the project form. So if we click that, here we are. But of course, we need to make some adjustments here. The data source will be project. We're going to update the item property. Instead of var task, it's going to be var project. And you'll see some of the items that we didn't have in this, we can just delete. So that's the project ID and the priority. But everything else, I can also delete I guess the status didn't carry over, but we can just add that, so not to worry. So we can go ahead and under the fields, we're going to look for status and add that in. So we'll have to make just a few adjustments there, but not too bad. And you can see we also lost some of the width properties that we had. So I'm just going to make this, turn it off and on. And we're going to do the same thing we did last time, just sort of drag some of the columns that we want to take up the full space. Start date, due date is fine. Assign to will take up the full space. Attachments will take up a full line, and status will take a full line, I suppose. And then if you remember, so the width here, we're going to change to parent.width. And again, same here, parent.width. This one will be parent.width divided by 2. Same with this one, divided by 2. Status will just be parent.width, parent.width, and parent.width. Okay, so yeah, so it's all looking good. Just the status, we need to make some updates like we did to the other data cards here. I'm just going to go into unlock and border, and the border color will be my theme dot light gray. The focus border will be 3. Focus border color will be my theme dot primary. Hover border color will be again my theme dot primary, and pressed border color will be my theme dot primary. Okay, and we also want to change some of the text fields here. We're going to change it to 12. We're going to do semi-bold, and that should do it. Oh, and this here, we're going to change to the color of my theme dot gray. Something cool that we can have is display the related tasks. So for this one, we have flexible height on, but we want to actually set the minimum height to something maybe like 400 because we're going to insert some related tasks. And the way we can do this, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can select this gallery here. So this is the one that only contains our tasks. And we can just copy this and go back into our project form. And within the primary here container, we can just paste it in. And then we can also just move it up one. So just move up. So it's above the buttons, the save and cancel button. And we just need to make some adjustments here. So this is going to filter the tasks where the project ID, maybe project ID equals this item equals var project.id. And I also want to sort them. So sort by columns. And let's sort this by the due date in descending order. I'm actually going to center the width and I'm going to do the minimum of 800 or the parent.width. And to make it a bit smaller, I'm going to do the minimum height of 0. And actually on the cancel button, I want to set the var project to blank. And same with after the save on the forms on success property. I want to change it, set the var project to blank and notify project saved. And this whole container for the project form, I actually want to display in vertical overflow. I want it to scroll. And let's look at a project that has more tasks. So in this case, there's a few more here. So that looks pretty good. If we do this, we can see all the tasks here, but you can see it takes up quite a bit of space. So I'm gonna change this up a little bit and I'm gonna delete the medium container here. And I'm also going to delete the description. And I'm gonna change the gallery's template height, the template size to maybe half of what it is. So I'm going to set it to 80. And I'm going to move this. So I'm going to text align to the left and I'm going to align it to the left. And I'm also going to turn on flexible height and turn on flexible height as well with minimum heights of 0. So that way it's always going to be perfectly centered. But another thing I want to do is show the color of the status of the task. So what I can do is if we go on the gallery and I click the edit button, I can insert a container and maybe do a horizontal container. We're going to set it's X to 0 and Y to 0. Width is going to be parent.width, or no, parent.template width, sorry. And height will be parent.template height. We're going to go back to our tasks gallery here. And this right here, border radius, this should be maybe like a 10. There you go. So it's like a nice round shape. I'm going to take this button here and I'm going to go back to our container and I'm going to paste it in there. I'm going to click edit. On select, I'm going to say false. Check the other error here. So this item dot status dot value. And if it's to do, we're going to use that same coloring. And I'm also going to set it to center align. And I'm going to change the height. So yeah, here the border radius, I'm going to set to 0 and drop shadow none. And this button, I'm going to set the height to parent.height. And I'm also going to set some padding on this container. I'm going to do 10 on the left, 10 on the right. Button, the height, I'm going to turn center. The height will be parent.height minus 20. And then this container, zero, zero. Make sure it's all stretched. Let's give a gap of maybe 20, maybe 10. And then move the button that's gonna hover over top all the way to the bottom. So reorder this to bring to the front. And the width for some reason didn't carry over, so we want it to be parent.width or parent.template width. And we also want the height to be parent.template height. And of course, this container, I'm going to do some border radius. So I'm going to do 5 with a drop shadow of regular. There you go. So that looks better. And I also want to add a title just above this. So I'm going to, maybe I'll take this and paste it into this main container. I'm going to move it over right above. We'll set the text to related tasks. Maybe we can make this more of a 12, change the height to maybe 40. Instead of flexible, I can keep it in the center, and the width, I can just reference my gallery, gallery 3_2 dot width. So that's just this gallery right here. And I can also then move it over, move this title over here. And maybe I can also actually change the height to maybe 80. And instead of middle line, I'll move it to the bottom. And I can maybe change the color to the primary color. So my theme dot primary. So that's looking pretty good. And I can probably just show the scroll bar. There you go. And so that's still going to navigate us. It's going to set the var task to this. We're going to navigate over to the next screen. Let's say this one, and we can see this is showing here. Now, another cool thing that we can do, so you see when we have the real estate, there's these cards are too long. So what we can do on this gallery, if we go to the wrap count, by default it's 1, but if we do if app.width is less than 900, only then it's 1, otherwise it's 2, then this does fit a lot more tasks. And then if we go into a smaller screen, let's say like the phone, then it'll go back to a 1 wrap count. This is one way to make it more dynamic. All right, so next we need to actually make a functional create button. So we want to be able to create projects, we want to create tasks. Right now we have just one create button up here, but we want to be able to, once we click on it, create a pop-up, and it's going to give us the option to select whether we want to create a new project or a new task. So we'll have to do this by creating another component, and we can sort of hide these and go to a new component. Maybe let's call it add pop-up or pop-up add, because we want to add a new item. So we're going to call it pop-up add. We're going to turn access app scope on. The width will be parent dot, or actually it'll be app dot width, and the height will be app dot height. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to add a fill property here, and let's just make it 0.11, something like that, or 0.1 is fine. So it'll be a bit of a transparent layer over top of the background. And now we can go ahead and insert our new container. And I'm going to do just a basic container here. And I'm going to set its X and Y properties to 0. The width will be parent.width. And parent.height. And that's going to cover the whole page. We're going to do border radius 0 and drop shadow none. And then within this one, we're going to insert another container that's going to be a vertical container. And this is the one where we're going to place and dynamically set it so it's always going to be sitting in the center here. So we're also going to make the background white. But we're going to keep the border radius. Let's make it 10. We'll give it a bold drop shadow. We're going to have the align horizontal be right at the center. The gap, we're going to do a 20 gap. And we're going to set its X property so it stays centered. We're going to do in brackets parent.width minus self.width divided by 2. And we're going to do a similar code for the height, or for the Y property. We're going to just take this, and instead of width, we're going to replace that with height. And there you go. It'll be dynamically always centered in the middle. And as far as the width and the height goes, I'm going to do something like this. So we're going to do a width of the minimum app width times 80% or 800. So as soon as it drops below 800, it's going to do 80% of the app's width. And for the height, we're going to do something similar. It's going to be basically the same, but instead of width, it's going to be height. And we're going to, instead of 800, it's going to be 400. And maybe let's make it 70%. There you go. I'm also going to add some padding to the top, bottom, left and right. So we'll do 20 for all of them. And that should do it for our container here. And so within here, we're going to add a little X icon so that we can close the pop-up, and we're going to add some buttons here that's going to be for a new task or a new project. So that's where the user can choose what they want to create. And so I'm going to insert another container, and it's going to be a horizontal one. And I'm going to set the justify horizontal to the right. We're going to change the width. We're going to keep it at flexible, but we're going to set the minimum width to 0. And we're going to turn off flexible height, and we'll just set it to something like 100. And we're going to turn off the border radius and drop shadow. And then within here, we're going to insert an icon. It's going to be a cancel icon. So it's going to live right up there. I am just going to change the height. I'll just make it a bit smaller. I'm going to do 30 and 30. I'm going to change the color to our primary color. So it's going to be my theme.primary. And on select of this button, we're going to set a variable, and it's going to be var popup add. And we're just going to set that to false. So anytime it's selected, that variable will return to false. Later, when we actually add this whole component into our screens, we're going to set its visible property to this property, and that's how we're going to control that. And so now that we have that, we can now add our buttons, the new task and new project buttons. I am going to utilize the button from our top header. So again, I'm just going to go here and copy this button because we've already styled it. I think we'll stick with that same formatting. And we're going to select this container, and we're going to paste it in there. And we're going to do one more paste. So there's our two buttons. They're going to live right underneath that container that we just created for this X, and there's going to be a gap of 20. So we're going to do, instead of create, it will be, let's do new task. And this bottom one here will be new project. And we could probably just adjust the width of these. Maybe instead of 100, let's make it 200. The height, maybe we can increase to 50. And that looks pretty good. And for the onSelect property of the new task, we're going to just navigate to our task form screen, and it's going to be screen transition fade. And we're going to copy that and just go to the other button, the new project, and it's onSelect property. We're going to paste that in, but instead of task form, it's going to be the project form. And also for both buttons, we need to make sure we set the form. So for the new task, we're going to do new form, and it's called form 1. And for the new project, our form is called, well, new form 1_1. And sometimes it's better if you do some naming conventions, rename them properly. It's going to be easier to reference, but that's how we set that up. And so now if we go back to our screens, and maybe let's do it on the tasks, and then we're going to insert our custom pop-up ad. There it is. And we're going to update its property for visible to var pop-up ad. And by default, it's false. And when you click the create button, because we've set, oh, actually we haven't. So we actually need to go back into the components, and we're going to go to the top header. And on this button, this onSelect property, we're going to set var pop-up ad to true. And okay, now when we go back to our screen, so now when we hit the create button, there it is, you can close it. And now when we hit the new task, there it is. And when we hit new project, it navigates us to the project form. Everything's blank except these related tasks. There are some blank values here. And we can see if we go to the tasks project, there are some empty items here. So we actually need to account for that. And on this galleries items property, we need to filter out any blanks. So we're gonna have to do project ID has to equal var project ID. We also want to make it so the project ID is not blank. And when we hold the Alt key or Option key, you can see there are no related tasks. And there you go. And when we hit the back button or the cancel button, we actually want to hide this. So actually in our component, when we go into the pop-up and the buttons, we're actually going to add an additional property, which is set var pop-up add to false. And we're going to copy that into the other button as well. And there you go. So now when we click create, new task, do your thing, when it goes back, it's not going to be visible until you click create again. And so we've added this pop-up to this screen, but we need to actually now copy it. So we're going to do Control C, go to my projects, and we're going to paste it right over top of everything. So now when we click create, it's also on here as well. And you'll want to do it on the home screen as well. So it sits over top of everything. Now, once you're in a certain project, you'll want to have the ability to create a new task that's automatically related to that project. So I think we can add a little icon or a button right here so that we can add more related tasks. So right now we just have a label control here, but in order to add a dynamic button that's going to resize with our app, we need to put this inside of a container. So what we're going to do is insert a new container, and it's going to be horizontal. It'll automatically get placed in the bottom here. We're going to make it not a flexible height, and we're going to fix that maybe to 50. I think 50 should be fine. And we're going to set the border radius to 0, drop shadow to none, and minimum width will be 0. And we're going to have a vertical alignment of center, and we're going to have a space between as the justify horizontal, because we'll want the text to be on one side and the button to be on the very end. So now we can just move this up. You can either right click, reorder, move up a couple times, or you can press the command button and the left square bracket, and it'll just move up a couple times. So let's leave it there. I'm also going to take this label with the related task and Control X, and we're gonna paste that into our container. And we're gonna adjust this. We're gonna set the height to be, stretch. The width I'm gonna change so that it's flexible. And the container itself, I'm gonna actually, instead of stretch, we're gonna make it be center. And we're gonna apply that same width that we have to this. And so we're gonna go back into the container and set its width property to the minimum, either 800 or the parent.width. So now it'll adjust accordingly. And so we have our label, but now I wanna add a button or an icon. Maybe I'll just add a button. I'll copy the save button and go back into our container and paste it in there. So you'll see it all the way on the right. And then I'm gonna change this to be a little bit shorter. So the height, I'll set it to 30. And the title is going to be, let's say, add task. And on the container, I'm gonna give some padding on the left and right. I'll just do 10 on each side, just to have it be more aligned. And I'm gonna change this label, and instead of bottom, I'm gonna set it to the middle. And I only want this container, the related tasks, to be visible if there is an actual project. So I'm gonna update the visible property to not is blank var project. So right now we do have a project, but if we go cancel and go create and a new project, you'll see it's no longer visible. And that's perfect. And we'll actually do the same for the task gallery. So I'm gonna go again, visible property, not is blank var project. And then that's kind of good. It stretches out. It gives us more space in real estate to work with, since we're not actually adding, we're not adding tasks until we actually have a project to add the tasks to. So there you go. But once we do have a project, these will be visible, which is great. That's what we want. And for add task, we're actually going to change the onSelect property, and we're going to do a new form 1. That's that's our task form, and we're going to then navigate to the task form screen with a fade transition, and let's see what that does. So we're gonna go add task, and there we are. Now it'll give us the ability to fill in a new form for a new project, but because we're already inside of this enhancing customer engagement strategy project, when I click add task, I want this to pre-populate with that, so we don't have to manually select it, because we're already working within the context of that project. And if we go here, the items property is just the projects. It's basically going to show us all of them. If we do the default selected items, we're doing a lookup on the project ID, where the ID equals this item.project ID. And we're actually we're gonna actually adjust this so it'll auto populate that. So we're gonna add some condition here. So we're gonna do if it's not blank, if not is blank var task, then we're going to do this, right? We're going to look up that particular item, that particular task and its ID, and match it up to the projects. But if it is blank, then we want to do a lookup of the projects where ID equals var project.id. And we're going to close out these brackets, and you'll see it auto populates now with the previous project that we were a part of. And if we go back, it's the enhancing customer engagement strategy. So add task, there you go. But if that task, if it does contain values, it's going to look up based on what it is for that particular task. And we could do other cool things too, like for example, the priority low, medium, high. Let's say we want to by default set it to low. What you can do is go to the default selected items, and if it's not blank, var task. Then I want the parent.default. Otherwise, I want in a record, we're going to do value in double quotes, it's going to be low. So that's a way you can do set the default here. So anytime it's a new form and there's no task created, it'll be a defaulting to low. So they don't actually even have to select it if they don't need to. So there's cool things you can do like that, but I think that's pretty good for now. If we go cancel, that's totally fine. And maybe let's test it out actually. I'm just going to change the size to the Pro. There we go. And let's do new task. We'll keep the project. Tests. Let's start date today. Due date whenever. Status. Let's put it into do. Assign to. Let's search for me. No attachments is fine. And then we'll hit the save. And there you go. So the task was saved. We go back into our previous screen, the project. And we can now see the new task. Now I also want to add a delete button. So let's say I want to delete this project. I want to add a little trash bin right there. And in order to do this, right now it's just a text label, but we'll want to put it into a container, similarly how we did here. So I'm actually just going to copy this. I'm going to delete this, and we're going to go into our container and paste that in there. So it's going to be another one of these containers, and I'm going to just move it up all the way to the beginning. And I'm just going to change this to projects. And maybe we can just make it, I think, what did we have? It's 16. Maybe that's fine. Oh, we'll call it project. And we'll just make this a little bit taller. Let's maybe make it 60 or maybe even 70. And I'm just going to change this text here. We're going to keep it like stretch, and we're going to set a minimum height to 0, but the vertical line, we're going to, instead of middle, it's going to be at the bottom, just to give some space from the top of the screen. And this button here, I'm actually just going to delete that, and we're going to insert a trash bin. There you go. And it's going to be aligned at the bottom. I'm going to make it 30 by 30 just to make it a little bit smaller. And we'll make this color maybe like a red. I don't have a theme for red, but I'll just pick one of these. Maybe like that. And we're going to copy this whole container right here. We're going to copy that and go into the task screen. So I can just go to the add tasks. We're going to go here and we're going to replace, do the same thing up here so that it matches. I'm going to paste it in and move it over to the very top. And we're going to change this label to task. There you go. And it's going to have the delete button as well. And so that's good. So that's how it's going to look on mobile. Now we do need to make it functional. So for the task, we could just do a remove, just remove this task altogether. But I'd also want to add a confirmation, like basically a yes or no, or like, are you sure you want to delete? So we can actually go create a new pop-up. And so the way we're going to do this, we're going to add and we're going to duplicate this component. I'm going to rename it Popup delete. And I'm just going to expand all the content here, and we're going to keep everything the same. I'm just going to delete the new project button, and I'm going to rename this one. Instead of new task, it's going to be delete. And I'm going to add within this container, I'm going to insert a text label, and I'm going to move it up above the button. And I'm going to say, are you sure you want to delete? And maybe set the width, make it stretch. And we're going to center the text alignment and maybe change this font, maybe to a Lato black and maybe a little bit bigger. This cancel button here will be var popup delete to false. And the delete We're going to change all of these properties. So I'm going to delete these navigations here. I'm going to do var popup delete to false. And we want to make this dynamic, or like we want to be able to and we'll make sure that if there is a variable for a task, we're going to do a check here. So and we're going to check where it's not is blank var task. Then I want to remove from the tasks list my var task. If it is blank, then I want to remove the project's var project. There's a number of different ways you could do this. This is just one of them. And maybe I'll set this visible property to the very end to be after it does that check and the logic and the delete and all of that. And then we're going to go back. So it's going to navigate to the screen that it was previously. So we actually want to also set var. We're going to remove var task and we're going to set var task to blank. That's very important. And then again, if it is a project, and we're also going to set var project to blank. There you go. So that's so if it's not blank, if var task, if we do have data in our var task, then we're going to remove that task and we're going to set var task to blank. But if it doesn't contain any values, then we're going to remove the project that's stored in var project, and then we're going to set var project to blank, and then we're going to set the pop-up delete to false, and then go back to the previous screen. So let's go ahead and go to our screens. We're going to, on our task form, we're going to insert our custom pop-up delete. We're going to set its visible property to var popup delete. And this button, the trash bin, we're going to set var popup delete to true. And this is only going to be visible if is not blank var task. We're going to do the same thing up here. We're going to set var popup delete to true, and its visible property will be not is blank var project. And on this screen, we're going to click the project form screen, and we're going to also insert that pop-up delete, and again set its visible property to var pop-up delete. So let's try that one more time. I'm going to add a task again. Test. I won't worry about all of these. Save. I'm going to add another one. Test2. Save. And so now we can go into test2 and we can delete this. There we go. And if we remove the project, are you sure you want to delete? We're going to delete that project. And I'm not going to really bother with the home page right now. It's blank right now, but you could do some counts on the number of projects that you've completed or the number of tasks that are currently assigned, that are due at a certain point. Maybe we can save that for a future video, how to improve on this app. But the core functionality is here. You can create new tasks, you can create new projects, you can relate them to each other, and all while making it look really good. So some stylish galleries here. We have navigation menus, we have pop-ups, confirmations, a nice looking form that's dynamic, and it's fully responsive. So I hope you found this useful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.